Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to NBA Fantasy Basketball Today. It's Thursday, June 4th. Is that correct? Is it June 4th? Okay,
Yep.
It is June 4th.
Yes,
Okay,
that's
cool. I'm your host tonight, Marcus at Mark_Anthony 35. Joined by my man Mike and Brent. How are you guys doing?
What's up? Good.
I'm good. We're good.
Good. Man, I haven't been on it so long. It's good. It's just good to be on, especially with the NBA fantasy. Well, not fantasy, but just in general, the NBA season on the horizon, man. I honestly was not expecting this. I was trying not to be negative, but I feared more that the longer it went on with this hiatus, I thought they might just call it. And I was really worried about that. But I'm glad everyone realized, like, as far as the players and, the teams and organizations, that they realized that it was just better overall. We can't have that
It's
awesome
not there
competitive season. Oh, is it not? I thought it got confirmed today.
I mean,
It's
so,
it's been they've already agreed on it on July 31st, I think. Just today.
I'm just saying a lot can happen. I wouldn't be surprised when it starts. When
True.
I see that ball,
Yeah.
when I see that ball go up in the first game, and there's no ref running from the back yelling at everyone to stop the game, then I'll believe.
I think they're setting it up in a way that when they start it, it's not gonna stop. Like, it's gonna be continuous and to finish the season. I think that's the idea behind it, where they're not gonna be sort of pausing in between. So I think they're testing players accordingly and getting quarantined appropriately so they can continue and finish the season.
Right. Now, I don't know if they said, but was there any mention of a possibility? Like, did they say for sure the playoffs would be in Orlando too, or just the play-in and rest of the regular season?
I think everything.
Everything, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm just hoping
that'd
it
be
doesn't
interesting.
delay the start of next season too much, and we can we don't get like permanently off track, where everything's shifted by a few months. If they can kind of rush the off season and get the season started as close to normal as possible, so that maybe next year we can get right back on track. The 21-22 season can maybe start right on time, but it'll be interesting. Players are used to a certain amount of time off. You're wondering if there'll be injuries, having to ramp back up this quickly and go right into basically playoff mode for those teams that have to play into the playoffs and the teams who are playing for a seed. It's going to be high intensity after a pretty long layoff without much of a ramp up. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a couple major injuries right off the bat. I mean, I hope, but it's at that level, that's a lot on your body.
Yeah, definitely. And unfortunately, like, the best thing is we've agreed on it. There's going to be, a season and there's going to be a playoff. But yeah, I mean, there's so many different sides to it that, it certainly will have their negatives along with the positives. Like you said, injuries. And I know a lot of teams, I think I read a report that the Blazers were one team that wasn't in favor of the whole play-in and stuff. And, I'm sure there's going to be some scrutiny with that, but I view it as just kind of working with what you got. I mean, it's not going to please everyone, but at least everyone gets a chance to compete and just, play the game. So
I think the bottom line there is, I think any basketball is good right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Anything that we can get out of it. From my point of view, I think I would have, from a fantasy point of view, I would have rather that they actually ended the season and started the next season at what is that, September? Oh, sorry, is that October, right?
Right.
Oh,
I would have rather just stop and then start a new season, and so we can have fantasy earlier as well. Well, earlier than on time, I guess, is the right way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be interesting to see how all of that pans out. But getting that confirmation today was huge. So definitely looking forward to that. But since we're on the topic, mainly what we'll be talking about this evening is some of the best fantasy players, fantasy basketball players, of the decade, since, the 2010s. So I felt like this was kind of hard because, I mean, there's so many different ways to go about this, especially when you look at the players who even in the last 5 years who have cemented themselves as some of the best fantasy players going forward, you know, and because the game's changed so much, like, I mean, you have some centers hitting over 3 threes, you know, 2 threes a game and stuff like that. It's just so much more complex, but it's a cool thing to look at and just kind of analyze. So I want to ask you guys, because, you know, Mike, I'll start with you. Is there anyone starting off that you thought was kind of easy to look at as like a sure bet, you know, of the 2010s, a player who you go to year in a year out?
Well,
or did you feel like it was kind of more difficult?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that it's funny because I was just gonna say it's also hard to put on a list, like just like you said, like we haven't talked prior to this, right? So we didn't really try to make sort of some compromise on the list. So you have your own list, I have mine, but I think for me the top 3 is unquestionable. Like LeBron James, you have Kevin Durant, and then I think you have to put James Harden in there for top 3. And I know that you guys can probably disagree on James Harden, but I just think from a reliability standpoint, even in games that are blowouts, he plays through injuries and plays through a lot of minutes.
Sure. Now, let me ask you this, Mike, you know, not to cut you off, because you just made a really good point. Now, when you're looking at value, where do you kind of look at the sheer value of a player and what they've added year in and year out, and the longevity of some guys being a fantasy juggernaut? Because James Harden, you're right. I mean, he is unreal when it comes to fantasy ball. But, you know, if we think about the transition from OKC to Houston, and, you know, in the past, you know, really 3 or 4 years, I feel like that's when he's taken that huge step, you know, especially each year getting better and better, as most of these players have, we're going to talk about. But do you think there's kind of, I don't want to say an asterisk, but he maybe has to be dinged more than he is, knowing that some of these other guys may have very well been top 5, top 3 picks for 80% of that time frame, 8 of the 10 years. You know what I'm saying?
So this is where it gets dicey, because are we drafting players based on, like, are we just giving it because of longevity, or are we giving it in their best statistical season? Right?
I think it meets in the middle. I think it meets in the middle a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. But to your point, I wouldn't argue James Harden should not be in there, you know, because he is that good. No, well, my point is for Mike to say James Harden's a top 3, right? Top 3 player of the 2010s. That is not like a crazy statement, you know, if you look at James Harden and how he contributes. But at the same time, you know, I know that as we're kind of looking at it, 10 years is a long time, you know, so there's a few of those guys who may have been chugging along and been on different teams, but still maintain that elite role. I guess that's more so what I was saying.
See, I was looking at it, and you know, the way, I mean, obviously, you know, it helps if a guy played all 10 years, but you know, there's some guys there's 2 groups that, you know, there's the LeBron James and the Kevin Durant who are like there the whole time and we're awesome, or like a Chris Paul or something like that. And then there's guys who were like really good in the first few years of the decade and fell off a cliff, like a Dirk Nowitzki or Dwayne Wade. And then there's the guys who were very good in the second half just because that's when they came in the league, like a Karl-Anthony Towns or Anthony Davis or something. So I tried not to punish guys too much for that. I tend to favor the guys who finished strong versus the guys who started strong. Those guys are more at the bottom of my list. But I looked at, you know, how many times did they finish in the top 10 fantasy rankings? How many times did they finish number 1? That's pretty much how I can buy top 5. How many times did they finish in the top 3? How many like amazing statistical years did they have? And, you know, longevity is a big thing, like, you know, because that's a big thing in fantasy. You draft a guy, they need to play. You know, you don't want guys that are constantly injured. So Some guys who dealt with injuries and things got dinged down my list a little bit, like a Kyrie Irving. I probably would have had him a little higher, but I put a guy like Kemba Walker in front of him because he wasn't hurt as much. So that sort of was my thinking when I put my list together, and I basically had the same top three. I had LeBron, Durant, but then I had Curry at 3, and I had Harden at 4. So I mean, I think we were thinking like right along the same lines, and and I'll just finish really quick. I guess maybe we go over our top threes and then move
you can just go ahead. Yeah.
So with LeBron, he only finished as the number 1 fantasy player one time in the decade, but he was totally dominant when you look at statistical categories over that time. And I made a couple of notes. He averaged 26.9 points. That's 52% from the floor. 7.7 boards, 7.5 assists, 1.5 steals. I mean, elite numbers. And then he had the most points in the decade. He had the 4th most assists, the 7th most steals, and the 10th most rebounds. So, I mean, when you're talking about a decade of fantasy dominance, I mean, LeBron James, even though he's not going to be necessarily year to year, not your number 1 pick, but if you had to pick a guy that's going to play for the next 10 years, I'd pick LeBron. You know, and Durant is right there. He had where LeBron only finished first once. Durant had 4 number 1 seasons in that decade. He was first. I mean, he could be argued for the number 1 guy. He was top 2 in his first 5 years. He was in the top 2 in his first 5 years of the decade. He finished in the top 2 in 4 seasons at number 1. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing. And then between Curry and Harden, I went with Curry at 3rd, just because, you know, the statistics he put up around his shooting, and had he not had some of the injuries in there, I mean, he could have been pushing for a top maybe 1 or 2. In his rookie year, he was the 6th best fantasy player, and that was the 2009-2010 year. So it was right at the beginning of the decade. And then he was 10th in his 2nd season. So awesome right from the beginning. Then he had some injuries after that, but then he wasn't. He was no worse than 4th in the next 5 seasons after that. So he was top 4. He started strong, had an injury, but then he was the top 4 fantasy guy in the next 5 seasons after that. First in threes and 3rd in steals over the decade. So that's what I have for my top 3. Harden had 3 number 1 seasons, and he was top 5 every year since 2012-13 season. He's been in the top 5 every year. So, I mean, those 4 guys, ridiculous dominance over the entire decade. You know, I'd love to hear an argument for somebody else in the top 3 or 4. I had to go with those guys.
So let me ask you this: for a guy who didn't play, you know, the first 3 or 4 years of the decade, right, and just completely like exploded once they did start playing, Anthony Davis didn't do it for you, huh? He didn't squeeze in
I
there.
had him number 5.
He was number 5. So
right
not top 3.
No, I had him top 5. Just
I'm guessing you have Anthony Davis then top 3.
Yeah,
I do. Okay, yes, I do.
make your argument.
So my thing is, first time I started, you know, like this is just kind of how I remember it, right? My first year playing fantasy basketball was like in 2014. And I remember I didn't really want to do it. I wasn't into fantasy sports, enjoying with some friends. And I remember I was like late to the draft, and I auto-drafted me Anthony Davis at the first pick. And I remember I was mad. I was like, dude, that's not who I would have went with. And my friend was like, don't worry. Like, he's really good. He's injury prone, but when he plays. But I just remember just watching those games, you know, as Anthony Davis does, where he would just go like 50 and 13 and 2 blocks, 2 steals, 4 assists, you know, 14 rebounds, just crazy numbers. So I guess I just feel like for how much he stuffed the stat sheet in all areas, really, you know, like maybe kind of lacking in threes a bit. You know, he wasn't like a knockdown shooter, but he could make a few. He just, to me, always was kind of like that perfect, like, fantasy basketball player, like the most well-rounded guy you could get. And something I thought was always underrated is he played the 4 or 5. So you were kind of like getting your center with that extra position limit of a power forward too. I don't know. I just felt like there weren't that many elite bigs, coming out of the draft, especially ones you can get in the top 5. So I guess to me, I just feel like even since 2013, 14, and I might have to default to you here, Brett, because I don't have the exact number, but Anthony Davis had to have had a lot of top 3 finishes, right? From at least 2013 on.
He had, he had 4 top 12 finishes. I think he was hurt a lot by his injuries. So
sure, so it really drowned it. Yeah, that's true. Even
I think that the total numbers are eating away on his value there.
Yeah, he was top 8 in per game production in all 6 years that he played in the decade. So he was top 8 based on his statistical output in all years. But yeah, his ranking suffered because of the games played a lot. And I think had he not had some of those weird, a lot of them were just like a thumb or something, like a fluke injury. And I remember him being one of those guys, like, he's clear-cut number 1, but you're like, do I want the guy who's hurt all the time? Or, I remember that being a question a lot for Anthony Davis early on. But that's what did it for me. Although, I mean, the guy's amazing. I mean, he probably could be number 1 with only 6 years in the decade if he had stayed healthy.
I think
right.
The only reason I'm not high on him is because I play a lot of head-to-head, weekly head-to-head, I guess. So there's always a sort of a sour taste. Like when I pick Anthony Davis, it's like, when is he gonna get hurt? Like in Roto, you can live with it. But because I don't play Roto, that's why I have more James Harden, because I know if he has 4 games, even back to backs, I know he's playing.
Absolutely,
I know, yeah. So there's more value to that, but I can make the case that he has more on a per game basis. He's right up there.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think he finished first once as far as top fantasy guy, but he was tops. For most of the years, he was like I said, top 12. But in per game stats, he was top 8 every year. But he would have easily finished as the top ranked fantasy guy for probably 4 out of those 6 years had he played 75 to 82 games.
The only other guy that I would bring up, and you mentioned who could crack into that onto this discussion, is Chris Paul. Because he just has a very juicy stat set, fantasy friendly game. I think he has some maybe 3 or 4 years where he's always in the top 3 or 4.
He had three top 3s.
So he's not going to be number 1 or number 2 because of LeBron James and Kevin Durant. But he's always like 3 or 4 in I don't know, in sort of close to the mid 2010s, right?
Yeah, sure. Three top 3s and 5 top 10s. Crazy, and he had 6 top 11s. So if you go to 11,
it's insane. He's always there.
Yeah.
Yep. Did I have it for the decade? His 2014-15 season. I took this down because the statistics for that season were crazy. He averaged 19 points, 10 assists, 5 boards, 1.9 steals. He shot 48.5%, shot 39.8% from 3, and shot 90% from the free throw line. He almost hit that. What is it? The 50-40-90 club. Season, and like Michael was saying, I mean, 6 top 11s, over the decade, and 3 top 3s. I had him and Russell Westbrook really close in my 6th and 7th spot.
That's what I was going to mention, Russ.
Yeah. What do you think about Russ? Where do you have him?
Well, he kind of like you said, he was kind of right there on the outskirts. I feel like Chris Paul gets the nod, like right there, like 6 or 7. But I felt like between he and Russ, they were almost interchangeable, because Russ, even when he played on the Thunder, like since 2010, like the full 10 years, he's been so consistent and so dominant and gotten better each one of those years. But surprisingly, he's been pretty durable too. He played the majority of the season for, every season, since 2010. And obviously once KD left and, it was basically his team, his stats and his performance only got better, similar to that of like James Harden, But I feel like Russell has like sneakily just maintained that dominance as far as being a triple-double threat. But he's always, even when he wasn't averaging a triple-double, which is absurd, he's always been like a 17, 18 points per game guy and at least probably like 6 and 6, And that's still like, like a really solid fantasy player to maintain over those years.
Russ was killed by his turnovers. I think I read he was the 3,000 turnover club.
Yeah.
But just so you know, Michael, I want to hear what you think about Russ, but I just want to read the stats really quick. Second overall in his MVP year, the 16-17 year, and he had 5 years in the top 5. And so he was right there from right in that top level, but those turnovers and that field goal percentage, man,
It's surprisingly good this past year.
I keep going back to Chris Paul, because if you go with nine cat, it's only the blocks really that he doesn't do. He's good in both percentages.
Mm-hmm.
He has points, he has rebounds.
Yeah,
he's elite in assists. Always gets you 1 to 2 steals a game. It's really just blocks, and he's a low turnover guy, right? So it's only just with Russ. You have to sort of punt one or two percentages, and then you have to swallow lots of the turnovers. So you kind of have to build around a team that's good percentage wise and can sort of buffer the. Well, I don't really look at turnovers when I draft, anyways, but but again, if you compare him from Chris Paul, I think they're far. I know you guys think they're close. But Russ, because of the, I think, name value, and also because of the popcorn stats, right?
Sure.
Points, rebounds, assists.
Yeah, but Russ can single-handedly win a league for you.
Yeah,
he can.
And especially if you're an 8-cat. Forget about it. Like he's crazy. So that I was just sort of looking at the top 5 finishes in fantasy. Like, regardless of the turnovers or whatever, he finished in the top 5, even with that. So that just shows how awesome his other categories were to get him there. I think it kind of gets a little fuzzy after, I think, this section. Did you guys have anybody in that top 7 that we haven't covered that you guys might have had up there in like that top 7 area that we didn't talk about? After that.
Yeah, it got a little murky for me too. No one who like absolutely stood out. I think and this is kind of what I brought up earlier. I feel like there are some guys who are worth mentioning, like as we've seen, like Giannis take a step, and Cat, obviously, which has been more recent over the past 5 years, as opposed, to the full decade. But like, as I was kind of looking at it, I didn't know where to exactly place those guys, because they're still kind of like living through that now, like if we look 2020 or excuse me, like 2015 to like 2030 or like, 2025, I think that'll give a better sample size for those guys. But I don't know. It was hard for me to say, but one guy I thought who was at least worth mentioning, I felt obligated to put Giannis as like an honorable mention, only because I just feel like, I
had him in the top 10.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I put him like right around, like once you listed the guys who were like solidified, like maybe not top 3 or top 5, but like you got through Chris Paul, Russ, like, that's kind of, those are the guys who came to mind, because they're so dominant now that like you would not take Giannis in the top 3, and he'll probably be that for the next 5+ years. So I feel like it's kind of like
he started off slow.
He did.
He didn't become Giannis overnight. And
no, yeah.
I mean, now, like you said, automatic, top 3 or top 5, I guess, depending on your league. But, he was the 10th guy for me. Another guy similar to that is Karl-Anthony Towns, who didn't have the whole year, but he came out of the gate firing, as a young guy. So he may not have had that many years, but I guess he only had like 4 seasons or whatever in 2010. But he averaged in the top 5 every year. His highest finish was 3rd. And the one guy I have in between Russell Westbrook and Chris Paul, and then Karl-Anthony Towns and Giannis, was I had Paul George at
yep. Yeah, that's a good one.
When I was looking at his numbers for the decade, you think about the injury and the lost time, and he even had kind of a slow start too, which says a lot. But he finished in top 11 5 times, and including a second place fantasy finish in the decade. So, outside of my top 5, these guys haven't got a first. But anyone who got a second got my attention, and then multiple top 5s or top 10s jumped out at me a lot too. And Paul George is one of those guys, and he's he still has that capability. That's why obviously the Clippers are so feared right now. And that's a guy. I actually had him way down at the bottom. I had him 23rd, but Kawhi Leonard was a guy who kind of, you think of him coming around in that decade. But he really wasn't that fantasy stud, that we see today. Well, when he's playing, at least.
He wasn't.
A lot.
The first year he like really, really took that step was like when the Spurs were like his team, and he was scoring like 25 plus every game. And I think that was like kind of 2014, 15, like right after they won and he got MVP. I think that's when he really just started to like assert himself as like a dominant fantasy player. But I think, before them, I mean, especially looking at his play style, he was never like popcorn stats, like just this elite player. Like I remember being in leagues and being like, why is Kawhi Leonard like such like a valuable guy? But like you look at those elite percentages, his defensive stats. I mean, he really had no weakness where he hurt you, and that's very valuable. So.
He's got low turnovers, right?
Yeah, low turnovers, very elite efficiency from the line, field goal, solid threes, crazy steal numbers, solid blocks.
It's only been this year actually that we've been getting a lot of assists from him. Right? Before, I think that's and he improved that. I think he's had like 5 assists now. From this year, he's averaging 5 assists. The only worry management with him. Always falls off during draft day. But I want to go back to Karl-Anthony Towns, because I'm going to mention a fellow Timberwolf. What do you guys think about the Kevin Love during the Minnesota days?
Oh,
I had him.
He's
like,
the way I put down my list. I didn't put like. I know it's top 20, but I went by position because I had a hard time just ranking them. So I just put, the top point guards, top shooting guards. So I had him actually, Kevin Love and Dirk Nowitzki during his MVP years. I mean, it's just so hard to overlook, especially Kevin Love during those like high rebounding, gets you a 3. Those years in Minnesota, basically.
That goes back to what I said in the beginning, where I rated the guys who started fast and then finished bad a little worse. I had them just outside my top 20, Love and Nowitzki. Love had 2 top 5s in the decade. So, I mean, and that was, right at the beginning of the decade with the double 20 rebound seasons or whatever. And Nowitzki actually had 4 top 20s. But Nowitzki especially, I mean, he fell off a cliff. Like he went from 4 top 20s to like outside of the top 100. He just didn't. And Kevin Love could still contribute, but he really hurt you by the lack of defensive stats. And he really became like a 3-point and rebounding kind of more of a specialist. which I think, being labeled a specialist, like someone like Klay Thompson, who I had at 18 actually, which I thought was pretty impressive that I didn't have a specialist in the top 20, to have a specialist like that in the top 20. But I think it also shows how difficult it is to rank guys over a 10-year period because of how much their careers change and injuries, and a guy like Klay Thompson, for me, I think hung in there and kept coming back to my list was because, before this ACL, he was so consistent. You knew exactly what you were getting when you drafted him. He filled a perfect hole on a team where you needed threes and shooting percentage. If you had a guy like Russ, Klay Thompson was a great guy to have on. A couple guys I wanted to touch on here because we had like 15 minutes, I think. The guy I had at 11 who almost cracked my top 10 was Damian Lillard for the.
That's solid, yeah.
I mean, he has been so consistent and gets so overlooked with like Steph Curry and those guys out there. I think Lillard hit 7 top 20s in the 2010. Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. That's like almost the whole decade he was finished in the top 20.
Yeah, he's always been there. And then for him to get better, I still what was it? Was it like last year or the year before? He had like an arguably top 5 finish, didn't he? He had like a real big finish. Like he really just that's what separated him being like a must draft, like top 7 player versus like, oh, I get him in the second round if he's there,
It's weird because it's weird to look at because I have him in my underrated sort of fantasy player, even at still underrated, right?
Yeah, how are you that good that long? Yeah,
late in the first round, and then he always finishes like top 5 or 6 at the end of the year. You just
he does
explosive last 15 games of the year. Blazers into the play.
I had a couple guys I want to get your opinion on, and these are like the workhorses, and they made my list when I saw it. So Lamarcus Aldridge.
Yeah, I was thinking him when you said Dame. He came to mind to me.
Paul Millsap. And
he was big on Atlanta.
Yeah, when he was on Atlanta, I wrote something down about that. He had Paul Millsap. The highest he ever finished was 6th place, but he had 4 top 20s. In his first years with the Hawks, he averaged 17, 8 boards, 3, 1.8 steals, 1.3 blocks, and 1 3.
Jeez, man.
That's crazy. That kind of multi-category. Yeah.
Like 2014?
That was, it was the first 3 years with the Hawks. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I want to say it was like 2013 to 2016 or something like that. Like,
it's funny because I just remember he was like such an elite player to have. Like you think how that's changed. Like Paul Millsap was like such an elite guy. Like.
Well, he started showing flashes. He was with Utah, and then he went to got that big contract with Atlanta and just became the guy. Like, and he was one of the first like stretch big men who you could get threes and blocks out of.
I was just gonna mention that because I followed the Jazz a lot, and towards the 2010, so this is the beginning of the decade. Paul, like towards the end of it, say 2008, 2009, Paul Millsap wasn't shooting threes for Jazz, and then he had a game versus the Miami Heat with came back. Williams was still there. I think this was
Williams,
mid 2010. He had a game in Miami where they had like a miracle comeback, and where he hit like 2 or 3 threes down the stretch. And ever since then, he like took threes.
That corner 3, I always see him in the.
Yeah.
After that, he was like a fantasy monster. After that, like as soon as he went to Atlanta, then he just really blossomed into a fantasy beast.
Another guy would be Marc Gasol. And that
Marc Gasol.
He was like one of the best centers you could possibly have, and he didn't start off shooting threes. That was something he added to his game, and he's really I could give him credit maybe as the first stretch 5. If we give Millsap maybe stretch 4, but there's a lot of power forwards who could shoot threes kind of back. Charles Barkley was shooting threes, but But Marc Gasol became that first, 7-foot giant out there hucking away, after Manute Bol went his threes that he would shoot. But so Marc Gasol had 4 top 12s, and I wrote down just reinvented the stretch 5, reinvented himself once he started slowing down a little bit, and he gave you blocks and threes, which is now we take for granted. All the big guys shoot threes and block, but back then that was a huge thing to have.
Yeah, and it's funny you said that because Marc Gasol, and him taking that step forward, he was like Anthony Davis pre-Anthony Davis, as far as being consistent. He was always a 1-and-1 guy in the block and steal category. He was at least 4+ assists, get you a lot of 16 or 17 points. And it's funny because just to share a few stats on that, from 2008 to 2014-15 season, he averaged 0.03s a game. And from there down, he would from the season he had 0 to the following season. So from 2014-15 to 15-16, he went from 0 threes a game to 1.4 the following season. Yeah. And then it went 1.4, 1.5, 1.3, 1.4, 1. So like you said, once he added that to his game, he had no weakness. I mean, he was just dominant all around.
I want to bring up a couple names though, because we kind of started the early. What do you think of Kobe Bryant and Dwayne Wade?
I had Wade on here.
About them.
Yeah.
2013, Kobe Bryant was still pretty good.
Yeah, even 2010.
What I wrote about Wade really quick, and then you guys can talk Kobe because I didn't even have my list. But I had Wade at 2 top 10s at the beginning of the decade, and then he didn't crack the top 60 after that. So that's why I had him drop. I just kept looking for another good season out of him, and it didn't come back after that. But I thought about Kobe, but I couldn't find him anywhere when I was researching, so I just left him off my list. But what did you guys think about? What was his last good season?
You go ahead and take it, Mike.
I think it was 2013. He was still pretty solid then. He's not. I think he might have been top 20 during that year. There was always an issue with him with slowing down, with sort of missing games now, sort of managing that. But he'll give you a burst of big games every now and then, which is very helpful, especially towards down the stretch. And even you knew as down the stretch too, there was nobody getting his shots. All him. And it's hard to find also when you're drafting. It's hard to find guys that are sort of in the middle round to give you lots of points. Yeah, it's still useful. And it was always giving you some sort of some assist as well, right? So I think he's just
his teammates would say so.
Can't really put him in the top 20, but it's like an honorable mention.
He did it all. From 2010, right? And, mind you, he retired 2015, 2016. But even when you're looking 2010 to about, 2012, 13 season, on average, every season, he was consistently averaging 27 points a game. And you're looking at about 5 assists, 4 rebounds, over a steal a game, 0.4 blocks. And surprisingly, in his 2014-15 season, he averaged 22 points a game. Mm-hmm. So, while it was kind of Kobe on its way out, you look at those numbers and he had 22 points. Mind you, turnovers were almost at 4. That's killing you. But he still had 1.3 steals, 5.6 assists, 5.7 rebounds. And, 81% from the line, you got to deal with the inefficiencies, but that's Kobe Bryant. So, still pretty solid.
Yeah, those are good stats.
High volume, he shot high volume free throws too at that clip. So he's in percentage wise.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's an honorable mention. I had him in my top 15. thereabouts. Just because Kobe Bryant is Kobe Bryant, but if you look at that sample size of where he only is he only applies from 2010 to 2016, like 4 of those 6 years were elite years. Like you're getting elite production from him. So, I mean, how that breaks down from a fantasy standpoint versus other players, I'm sure he's kind of buried, kind of like you said, D-Wade. But looking at the raw numbers, I mean, that's that's pretty solid, consistent contribution, over that small time. So
Yeah.
I like that one, Mike. I think that's worth mentioning for sure.
I got one surprise guy that popped up when I was researching that I was like, really? And I'm a Warrior fan too. Was Monte Ellis.
Monte, oh man.
He had 7 top 40 finishes, and he had a top finish in the 2010-2011 year.
Mm-hmm.
He had a top. So, I mean, 7 top 40s in a 10-year period is pretty consistently great.
Yeah.
So he surprised me.
People forget he was really good.
They do. He was a small market team guy. He was on the Warriors, where he got started right out of high school. And he was on that We Believe Warriors team with Baron Davis. And then he was on the team when they drafted Curry. And that really kind of bugged a bit. And then obviously the Warriors chose Curry and traded Ellis. I think in the Andrew Bogut
trade, sent him to Milwaukee.
Yeah, which set up that Warrior, set up the dynasty really. Was Bogut, helped him win that first championship, and but Ellis I think is really overlooked as a good player. He was a pretty quiet guy, but for his size, like he could get up, and he had a lot of highlights.
Oh yeah.
I remember. And let me see. So then I had Kemba Walker. He was in my top 15. 5 top 20s. He was, for the whole decade, he was top 25 in points, assists, steals, threes, and free throw percentage. Yep. So totally. And then Kyrie Irving, I had up there too. Having injuries, another guy, if him and like John Wall are 2 guys who I think would have been much higher had injuries not affected them. Because you're talking about, John Wall was top 15 4 times when he wasn't hurt. Kyrie Irving, he missed at least 10 games in all but 1 season. So, he could not count on him from a fantasy standpoint. And I think that's what hurt like Kawhi and Kobe and stuff like that on my list, was not being able to get those. They can't help you if they're not in.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess one other name I'll mention that is on my list. I think I've mentioned everybody. Oh no, 2. Kyle Lowry and Serge Ibaka were 2 other guys who had great decade. Kyle Lowry had 3 top 10s. He was never lower than 19 or 69th. So even in his rookie year. And then Serge Ibaka had 3 top 25s. Ibaka is another one of those guys that had the 3-point shooting and the blocks. Ibaka. And you look back on that Oklahoma City Thunder team, it's like how they couldn't do anything or win, a title with that team or multiple titles. They just had timing.
I'm a big OKC fan, man. Don't rub it in. All right. It still hurts for me.
Those teams are crazy though, but
really crazy.
That's my list.
Have you bought those years in Oklahoma City where he had a year where he was 3 blocks per game, and so he was very valuable. And you can make the case you can draft him inside the top 10 just because of the blocks. The only thing I remember about him during those years is that when he started taking those 3-pointers, value actually I think moved down a little bit. Just the field goal percentage was going lower as well. So his percentages was kind of taking a hit. So usually when I was building a team around when I had a team with Ibaka at that time, I would always put field goals and blocks together. But when he started shooting threes, just like Paul Millsap did, field goal percentage.
Yeah.
But
It suffers. Yeah. That happens with a lot of and it's happening a lot more because guys realize as they lose their athleticism and they can't rely on getting up and blocking and stuff as much. If they can add that 3-point shot, they're so tall that they can get their shot off almost any time from 3. And so guys have extended their career. I mean, Brook Lopez is a guy who comes to mind who, you look at what he's done to rejuvenate his fantasy career. I mean, he'd be right there with his brother. He rarely rebounds. I think, what does he average, like 4 or 5 rebounds?
5 rebounds a game.
Yeah. For a guy who blocks almost 3 shots a game, he can't put on a board, but he'll shoot 3. He'll make 3 threes a game. So
his best rebounding years were in Brooklyn. I think he averaged 6 rebounds, but this was prior to him shooting a lot of threes. He was just sitting and just block some shots and rebound too. But he was never a high, like he was never like a 10 rebound guy anyway. But he would still get like 7 rebounds a game in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's a guy who he's probably at least in the top 30 for the decade. I couldn't keep going. I got to 25 and I stopped. But is there anybody you guys can think of, that we haven't thrown out there that was interesting or jumped out?
There was one guy who was kind of floating around those like close to top 25, closer to 30, consistent, but then kind of fell off a cliff. But when you're looking at 2010, and that man is Rajon Rondo. He kind of like Dirk Nowitzki, not as much because he was a lot more elite, right? But in that 2010, when the Celtics were still competitive and he was, playing at some of his best game, when you were looking at that solid point production and his steals, assists were elite, super elite field goal percentage. He never was like a top 10, top 15 guy, but he had at least 5 seasons where he was a top 26, 27 guy. So he kind of was a steady Eddie until, obviously he jumped around a few teams and fell off. But that wasn't, that was interesting because I didn't think about it at first, but it kind of like made me think because I was just talking about a buddy, talking to a friend about the like Miami Heat, Boston Celtics battles when LeBron was on Miami and just how elite Rondo was around that time. And I was like, oh yeah, that was right around then. So from about 2010 to 13, 14, he was like, I think consistently top 25 or higher.
If he had any kind of jump shot, he would have been top 10.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Is there anyone, we have a few more minutes. Is there anyone, we're forgetting here that, I've been trying to think, over the last 10 years, I pretty much, I played fantasy NBA about the last 10 years.
Have you? Okay.
I think we covered most of the guys.
Yeah, I think we did.
I don't know.
One guy that came to mind.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Mike. One guy that came to mind, like, once again, not so much underrated, but as far as like an underrated player who's, kind of was consistent. Tyson Chandler was kind of one of those guys that came to mind. He kind of sneaks away from you, but like he was a dominant big when he was, on Dallas and then, eventually went on, to play with New York and whatnot. But he put up some pretty big, like, big elite numbers. And I feel like while, he really didn't have too many, like, even top 20 finishes, he was one of those guys where, like, when you needed a big in the mid rounds, he usually finished well above his average draft pick. So that was someone I kind of skimmed across when I was looking, but I was like, But now that you mention it,
I have him as a sort of a specialist.
Yeah, definitely a specialist. Yeah.
And so I have like Larry Sanders as well, Bucks.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
He had seasons where he had 2 or 3 blocks a game, that sort of thing. And then I have here also like Steve Nash. And he's always kind of been, I don't know, like sort of overlooked as well in sort of the top player. even in reality, that's kind of the case. But he had some great seasons with the Suns, and it's rare to find the high assist point guard too. You can always pencil him for 10 assists a game. Good.
I think a guy who I think just because he's had some injuries and you almost forget that he's actually still in the league is the other Gasol, Pau Gasol.
Yeah. Man.
The first 5 years of the decade, super solid, mid-teens scoring, 1 to 2 blocks a game, 11, 12 rebounds a game, like a really strong rebounder. A double guy who gave you a lot of blocks and then added a bit of a 3-pointer too. It's a shame that he's just had these foot injuries he shake because he still seems to have the bug and wants to play. And he just can't seem to get back. I always see him. Someone always has him stashed, in the IR or something in Dynasty, and just hoping that he comes back and averages 11 and 10 or whatever in 16 minutes or something. But yeah, he's another guy. When does I wanted to look up Nash? I didn't even think about Nash here for the last time. Every time I think of a guy, I look and it's like, oh, he was good from 2005 to 2010. So Nash, his last year was the 2013-14 year. Yeah, he still was putting up good numbers.
Still productive.
Yeah.
Still averaging double-digit assists. His steals fell off quite a bit. He was probably hitting a bunch of threes. Yeah, at least 1 or 2 threes. Yeah, solid.
He would be a specialist now in terms of assist.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm coming up on my time. I don't know if you guys want to keep going or what, but I'm going to have to split for family stuff.
Oh, no, all good, man. I think that's a pretty good stopping point. I mean, knowing us, we could probably go all night, but
yeah,
the NBA is back or on the horizon at least, so we have plenty of time and opportunities. And I look forward to doing this more. And as things kind of get closer and closer, hopefully we'll have that much more great content to cover. So I appreciate you guys getting on and everyone tuning in.
Yeah, it's always fun, Mark, and nice to meet you, Michael. Yeah. Hope we get to do this again soon. Had a blast.
Yeah. All right.
It was nice to meet you guys. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.